The morning sun cast long shadows across my backyard as I carried the last of the pool cleaning supplies back to the shed. It was going to be another scorching July day in suburbia, the kind where the asphalt shimmers like water and the only salvation comes from the cool embrace of chlorinated water. I had been looking forward to this Saturday for weeks. No work calls, no deadlines, just me, my pool, and the fantasy novel I'd been dying to finish. My name is Marcus, and I'm a 34-year-old graphic designer who had finally scraped together enough money to buy my dream house 6 months ago. It wasn't much. A modest 2-bedroom ranch with a small but perfectly maintained backyard dominated by an oval above-ground pool. To most people, it might have seemed ordinary, but to me, it represented everything I'd worked for since graduating college with student loans that seemed to multiply like rabbits. The pool had been the selling point. The previous owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, had maintained it meticulously for over a decade. They'd installed a beautiful deck around it, complete with built-in benches and even a small pergola for shade. When I first saw it during the house tour, I could practically hear the gentle lapping of water calling my name. But paradise, as I was about to learn, always comes with a price. The trouble started about 2 months after I moved in. Karen Whitmore lived in the house directly behind mine, separated only by a chain-link fence that had seen better days. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone says Karen, blonde hair styled in that particular bob that screams, "I want to speak to your manager," always perfectly made up even when taking out the trash, and possessed of an uncanny ability to appear at her back window whenever anything remotely interesting happened in the neighborhood. At first, our interactions had been cordial enough. She'd introduced herself over the fence while I was setting up my patio furniture, bringing homemade cookies and making small talk about the weather. But I noticed her eyes kept drifting to the pool, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Was it longing? Disapproval? Envy? "You know," she'd said that first day, "the Hendersons rarely used that pool. Quiet as church mice they were. Perfect neighbors, really." The way she emphasized perfect made my skin crawl, but I'd brushed it off as harmless. Nostalgia. The first complaint came 2 weeks later. I was floating on my back, eyes closed, listening to music through waterproof earbuds when I heard aggressive tapping on the fence. Karen stood there in her pristine white tennis outfit, arms crossed, looking like she'd just witnessed a crime. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured politeness that every retail worker knows means trouble. "I hate to bother you, but the splashing is quite loud. My husband is trying to nap and, well, she..." Let the sentence hang there, waiting for me to fill in the blank with an apology. I pulled out my earbuds and treaded water, confused. "I'm sorry, what splashing? I was just floating." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The filter. It's very loud, and when you move around, the water, it makes noise." I glanced at my pool filter, which was running at its normal, barely audible hum. "I can turn it off for a bit if you'd like, but it really needs to run to keep the water clean." "That would be appreciated," she said curtly, then spun on her heel and marched back to her house. That was the beginning of what I now think of as the pool wars. Over the next month, Karen found increasingly creative reasons to complain. The pool light was too bright and shone into her bedroom window. It was a small LED that barely illuminated the water. My pool vacuum was too loud. I only ran it early in the morning when most people were at work. The chlorine smell was giving. Her headaches, despite the fact that I kept the chemical levels perfectly balanced. Once, she even complained that the sound of me diving into the water was disruptive. This from a woman whose husband mowed their lawn every Saturday at 7 a.m. sharp. I tried to be accommodating at first. I installed a timer on the pool light, so it would turn off automatically at 9 p.m. I switched to a quieter vacuum and only ran it on weekday mornings. I even started buying a more expensive, low-odor chlorine alternative, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. The situation escalated when Karen discovered that my property line extended 2 feet further than she'd thought. A surveyor had come out to mark the boundaries for a fence repair, and the results showed that what Karen had assumed was shared space was actually entirely on my property. This meant that my pool, which she'd been treating as an eyesore that affected her property values, was actually positioned perfectly legally on my own land. The look on her face when the surveyor explained the boundaries was something I'll never forget. It was like watching someone realize they'd been arguing with a mirror for months. But instead of backing down, Karen seemed to double down on her mission to make my pool ownership as miserable as possible. That's when the really petty stuff started. She began timing my pool activities and taking photos from her bedroom window. When I'd be swimming laps in the morning, I'd catch glimpses of her peering through her blinds with what looked suspiciously like a camera. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox about neighborhood noise ordinances and respectful pool usage guidelines that she'd apparently written herself. The final straw came when she convinced several other neighbors to sign a petition asking me to consider the impact of recreational water activities on our peaceful community. The petition was ridiculous. It read like it had been written by someone who'd never actually seen my pool usage but had convinced themselves I was running some kind of aquatic nightclub in my backyard. But I kept my cool. I'd invested too much in this house and this dream to let one difficult neighbor ruin it for me. I continued my routine. Morning swims before work, weekend relaxation sessions with a good book, the occasional evening float under the stars. I was determined to enjoy what I'd worked so hard to achieve, which brings us to that perfect Saturday morning in July. I had planned the ideal pool day. I'd taken Friday off to give myself a long weekend, stocked up on snacks and cold drinks, and even bought a new floating lounger that promised to be the ultimate in aquatic relaxation. The weather forecast showed clear skies and temperatures in the mid-80s, perfect pool weather. I was just settling into my new lounger with my book when I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's back door slamming shut. Through my peripheral vision, I could see her stomping around her patio, gesticulating wildly while talking on her phone. Her voice carried across the yard, shrill with indignation. "Yes, I need to report a disturbance," she was saying. "My neighbor is being extremely disruptive with their pool activities." I sat up straighter, my book forgotten. Was she seriously on the phone with someone about me floating quietly in my own pool? No, it's not a party," she continued, pacing back and forth. "But the noise is unacceptable. The splashing, the filter running constantly, it's affecting my family's peace and quiet." I couldn't help but laugh. Here I was, alone in my pool, doing literally nothing but reading a book while barely moving enough to stay afloat, and somehow this constituted a disturbance worthy of a phone call. But my amusement quickly turned to disbelief when I realized who she was talking to. "Yes, I'll stay on the line," she said, her voice taking on that particularly satisfied tone of someone who thinks they've just played a winning card. "I want to file a formal complaint about the noise violation happening right now." She was calling the police. On me, for using my own pool. I paddled over to the edge of the pool, my mind racing. This had to be a bluff, right? Surely the police wouldn't actually respond to a call about someone quietly reading in their own backyard pool. But as I watched Karen continue her animated phone conversation, complete with dramatic gestures toward my pool, I realized she was deadly serious. 20 minutes later, as I was toweling off and contemplating whether to stay outside or retreat indoors, I heard the sound that confirmed my worst fears. The low rumble of a car engine followed by the distinctive slam of car doors. Through the fence, I could see the top of a police cruiser parked in front of Karen's house. This was really happening. The police were here because Karen had called them about me using my own pool. I quickly threw on a t-shirt and flip-flops, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and righteous indignation. As I rounded the corner of my house, I could see two police officers standing on Karen's front porch, notepads in hand, while she gestured wildly in the direction of my backyard. "Officers!" I called out, trying to keep my voice level and friendly. "I believe there might be some confusion here." The older of the two officers, a tired-looking man with graying hair, turned toward me with the expression of someone who'd seen it all before. "Are you the homeowner at 1247 Maple Street?" "Yes, sir, Marcus Thompson. I understand there's been a complaint about my pool." Karen's face lit up like she'd just won the lottery. "Yes, Officer Martinez, this is exactly what I was telling you about. The constant noise, the complete disregard for the neighborhood's peace and quiet." Officer Martinez glanced between Karen and me, then at my house with its quiet backyard where my pool sat still and silent. Ma'am, what exactly is the nature of the disturbance? The splashing! Karen exclaimed, as if this Essie. As Karen's screaming reached what I thought might be the peak of human vocal capacity, something unexpected happened. Officer Patterson, who had been trying to calm her down, suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared at her with a look of recognition that sent chills down my spine. Wait a minute, he said, his voice cutting through Karen's hysteria. Ma'am, what did you say your name was? Karen paused in her tirade, breathing heavily. Karen Whitmore, why does that matter? I'm the victim here. Officer Patterson pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something, his expression growing more serious by the second. Officer Martinez noticed his partner's sudden change in demeanor and moved closer. Patterson, what is it? Martinez asked quietly. Karen Whitmore, 1249 Maple Street, Patterson murmured, still scrolling. Martinez, we need to talk. Now. The two officers stepped away from us, huddling together in an intense whispered conversation. I could see Patterson showing Martinez something on his phone, and both of their expressions grew increasingly grave. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to interpret this as validation of her complaint. Finally! She screamed triumphantly. They're taking this seriously! I told you this was a serious matter! But something was off. The way the officers kept glancing at Karen, then at each other, then back at their phones didn't suggest they were discussing noise ordinances. It looked more like they were discussing something far more serious. After what felt like an eternity, Officer Martinez approached Karen with a completely different energy than before. Gone was the patient, slightly amused demeanor of a cop dealing with a minor neighbor dispute. In its place was the focused intensity of someone conducting serious police business. Ma'am, I need you to calm down and listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice now carrying unmistakable authority. Are you Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, formerly Karen Elizabeth Morrison? The question hit Karen like a physical blow. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. What? Why would you? That's not... She stammered, all traces of her earlier fury replaced by what looked like genuine panic. Ma'am, please answer the question, Officer Patterson said, now positioning himself so that Karen was effectively blocked from moving toward her house. Are you Karen Elizabeth Morrison? The transformation in Karen was remarkable and terrifying. The confident, indignant suburban mom disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. Her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing between the officers and her house like a trapped animal. I mean, that was a long time ago, she whispered. That was before I was married. That was before I changed. Officer, Martinez nodded grimly. Ma'am, I need to inform you that there's an active warrant for your arrest in the state of Florida. Karen Elizabeth Morrison is wanted in connection with a hit-and-run incident that resulted in the death of a 16-year-old girl in Tampa, Florida, in 2018. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. I felt my knees go weak. The gathering neighbors, who had been watching this unfold like some kind of suburban entertainment, suddenly went silent. Even Mrs. Peterson's coffee mug slipped from her hands and shattered on her driveway. Karen's face went through a series of expressions: denial, panic, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate resignation. No, she whispered. No, I'm not that person anymore. I'm married now. I have a family. I'm a different person. Ma'am, you need to turn around and place your hands behind your back, Officer Patterson said, pulling out his handcuffs. And that's when Karen completely lost it, but in a way that was far more chilling than her earlier screaming about pool noise. You don't understand, she shrieked, but now there was raw terror in her voice instead of indignation. I can't go back there. I can't go to prison. I have a life here. I'm a good person now. She began backing away from the officers, her eyes wild with panic. It was an accident. It was 7 years ago. I was young and stupid, and I panicked. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." The confession tumbled out of her in a rush, as if the carefully constructed dam of her suburban life had finally burst. "I was drinking, okay? I was at a party and I shouldn't have been driving, but I was young and I thought I was fine. And then this girl, she came out of nowhere on her bike. It was dark, and I didn't see her until it was too late." Officer Martinez was now speaking into his radio, calling for additional backup and a transport unit, while Officer Patterson continued to approach Karen slowly, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "I stopped," Karen continued, tears now streaming down her face. "I got out of the car, and I saw her lying there, and there was so much blood. She was just a kid, and she was dying, and it was my fault. I should have called 911 right then, but I panicked. I was scared, and I was drunk, and I knew my life was over." The neighborhood had gone completely silent except for Karen's confession. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. "So I left," she whispered. "I left her there, and I drove home, and I told myself that maybe someone else would find her, maybe she'd be okay. But I knew she was probably going to die, and I left her there alone." Officer Patterson was close enough now to reach out and touch Karen, but she was in her own world, lost in the memory of that night 7 years ago. The next day, it was all over the news. Sarah Michelle Crawford, 16 years old, honor student, was found dead on Bayshore Boulevard. Hit and run. They said she might have survived if someone had called for help right away. Karen's voice broke completely. "She might have lived if I hadn't been such a coward." I found myself staring at this woman I'd thought I knew, this person who had made my life miserable over pool noise, and realizing I had been living next to a fugitive, someone who had killed a teenager and spent 7 years hiding from it. "After that, I couldn't stay in Florida," Karen continued, her voice barely audible now. "I changed my name, moved here, met Robert, got married. I thought I could build a new life. I thought I could be a good person if I just tried hard enough." Officer Martinez finished his radio call and approached Karen from the other side. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but I need you to comply with the arrest. You can explain everything to the detectives, but right now, you need to come with us." Karen looked around wildly, as if she was just now realizing where she was and what was happening. Her eyes landed on me, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret or even apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though I wasn't sure if she was talking to me, to the officers, or to Sarah Michelle Crawford. "I'm so sorry about everything." But then something shifted in her expression, and the fear was replaced by a kind of desperate cunning. "Wait," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Wait, you can't arrest me. This is entrapment or something. You came here for a noise complaint, not to arrest me. This isn't legal." Officer Patterson shook his head. "Ma'am, a warrant is a warrant. We have a legal obligation to arrest you regardless of why we initially made contact." "No!" Karen shouted, and suddenly she was running. Not toward her house, but toward mine, toward my backyard, toward my pool. The officers shouted after her, but Karen had a head start and was running with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. She vaulted over my back gate with surprising agility for someone in a tennis skirt and designer sneakers. "Karen, stop!" Officer Martinez yelled, but she was already in my backyard, running full speed toward the pool. What happened next was so surreal that I sometimes wonder if I dreamed it. Karen reached the edge of my pool, the same pool she had spent months complaining about, the source of all her supposed grievances, and without hesitation, she dove in fully clothed. But she didn't come up. The officers and I rushed to the pool's edge, expecting to see Karen surface at any moment. The water was crystal clear. I'd cleaned it thoroughly that morning, but Karen was at the bottom of the 8-foot deep, and she wasn't moving. "Is she?" I started to ask, but Officer Patterson was already pulling off his duty belt and boots. "She's not coming up," he said grimly. "Martinez, call EMS, now." Patterson dove into my pool in full uniform, and I watched in amazement as he dragged an unconscious Karen to the surface. She was limp, unresponsive, and turning blue around the lips. The next 20 minutes were a blur of paramedics, more police, Cars and neighbors gathering in increasing numbers to watch the drama unfold in my backyard. Karen was loaded onto a stretcher, still unconscious but breathing, and rushed to the hospital under police guard. As the ambulance disappeared down Maple Street, Officer Martinez turned to me with an expression of exhausted bewilderment. "In 20 years of police work," he said, shaking his head, "I have never seen anything like this. A noise complaint that turns into a murder arrest, that turns into a suicide attempt in a swimming pool. Is she going to be okay?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. Physically, probably. They got her breathing again pretty quickly. Mentally, he shrugged. "That's above my pay grade." As the crowd began to disperse and the police finished their reports, I found myself standing alone in my backyard, staring at my pool. The same pool that had been the center of so much conflict now felt like